So if you've already met Pauline in several functions here, now formally introduce you to her. Pauline E. Nygander recently completed her new Master of Divinity program at Pure University Theological School in Madison, New Jersey.
Thank you.
I know that's quite nice. Where she was studying for Unitarian Universalist ministry. While studying it through, she received an award for excellence in homiletics, which is preaching, in the 21-22 academic year, and an award for excellence in leadership in the 23-24. Pauline has been a member of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation Kinsman since 2013, where she has served in various leadership roles and is now one of their 2 seminarians. As a proud trans woman and lesbian, Pauline has spoken often to different community and student groups about her perspective and life in hopes of educating people through honest and engaging conversation about trans life and issues. For this work, she was awarded the 2017 Triad House LGBTQ+ Champion Award from Life Prize. And she's here today to speak to us about fixing a broken world, the Jewish concept known as
Tikkun Olam.
And instead of reading this,
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Pauline. So, before I dive into the sermon, I have I hopefully won't get run out of town on this one, because I know sometimes the Bible and UU churches don't exactly go fantastic together. But you will understand when I get to the sermon, especially since the concept of Tikkun Olam is rooted in Genesis. So this comes from Genesis 1, starting at verse 20, and it is from the Jewish Study Bible. God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, small text, I'm getting older. And all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. A dark cloud of worry spread throughout the forest. The hunters of the nearby village had no longer become satisfied with capturing the birds of the forest in their snares one at a time. These hunters had developed a new kind of technology where they took long strands of fiber, crossed those strands one over the other, and then tied them together at the places they intersected. They were making nets. And instead of capturing a single bird at a time, these hunters could now capture larger amounts of birds in one go. The birds of the forest that had managed to escape these new nets were terrified. What could they do? Some of the birds that heard their stories lost all hope. It is pointless, they all peeped in their feeble voices. There is no way we can escape this horror. We might as well give up now. Some of the birds, however, got busy. They built up their muscles and sharpened their beaks. If I get caught, I'll be able to break my way free. I'll be strong enough to fly away, boasted these big birds. And while it was encouraging to hear some of the birds had hope, a number of the other birds did not like the brazen approach of these strong birds. If I escape while others do not, my life will be filled with unhappiness. Now, a meeting was called between all of the birds of the forest, and there was much chattering and whistling and cawing that happened throughout the day and the night, until finally the birds had a plan. Now, it did not take long for the birds to put their plan to the test, for off in the distance, they heard the sounds of a bird in distress. Many birds heard the call, and they all flew toward the sound to help this bird. And when they landed on the branches of a big tree, they could not see anyone in distress. And suddenly, they were all trapped beneath a net. It had been a trick, and now they could barely move. Some panicked and cried out, but others remained calm, and that calmness settled upon all the birds as they began to whisper, "Remember our plan. When the king of the birds sings, let's all flap our wings." And the king of the birds began his tune, and the birds began to flap their wings. It was hard work. When it began to feel impossible for some of the birds, they looked at their neighbors and felt encouraged to see that they too were working hard at flapping their wings. Suddenly, they all lifted out of the tree and they rose higher and higher into the sky with the net coming with them. And when a second signal was given, the birds managed to tilt their bodies in unison to have the net slide off of their backs and down onto the ground. After that, a new melody could be heard in the forest, a melody about there being strength in unity and in working together. Having grown up as a child in the 1980s and 90s, I was raised on the successors to Gene Roddenberry's 1966 show Star Trek, with Star Trek: The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Now, for those that may be unfamiliar with the setting of the shows, it involves a number of characters, both human and alien, that were all members of a united federation of planets, whose primary mission was to seek out new life and new civilizations, and to boldly go where no one has gone before. Earth worked to become a world that had moved beyond the political and social issues that had been plaguing mankind, and humanity was able to create an idyllic world where there was no crime, no one was lacking for any basic necessities, and everyone worked toward the betterment of mankind and humanity as a whole. It was a society where the thought of infinite diversity and infinite combinations was not only just a saying, but a way of life. It was so impactful to my young, impressionable mind that I thought we were already there in a lot of ways in our society. I was lucky to be in an elementary school that had a fairly mixed population of students from all different races and walks of life. And despite the Challenger disaster in 1986, space exploration seemed to be picking back up again with things like the Hubble Space Telescope, a planned International Space Station, and countless other scientific endeavors in outer space. We were well on our way to this fantastical world that I had watched before me on television. However, as I grew older, I learned that the idyllic world of Star Trek was most decidedly not the world that was present before me. This fact seems to be reinforced every morning when I allow myself 15 to 20 minutes to watch and read the news. And with each news story that I read or watch, it feels like our world is moving further and further from the world I had hoped for when I was a kid. And instead, it seems to be heading down the path toward the very things that shows like Star Trek tried to warn us against. Some of us may employ the use of more colorful language in saying this, but many may see our world as broken. And the problems that the idyllic world in Star Trek had eradicated, well, they just seem to get worse. Like the birds of the story, because of the enormity of the challenges and the brokenness facing us, it can be very easy for us to fall into despair. In the Jewish faith tradition, there exists a phrase, Tikkun Olam. It is a phrase that was originally found in the Mishnah, a body of classical rabbinic teachings compiled in the 3rd century of the Common Era. And the phrase's translation comes out to something like to repair the world or world repair. Now, in the Mishnah, Tikkun Olam referred to a social policy that provided extra protection to those potentially at a disadvantage. I'm going to read that again. A social policy that provided extra protection to those potentially at a disadvantage. It was then expanded upon in the Kabbalistic texts of Isaac Luria in the 16th century, who called upon humans to retrieve and reconnect the holy sparks of the divine that are scattered on the earth. And while it took a little while, but from there, the modern Tikkun Olam movement emerged in the mid to late 20th century as Jewish people, both secular and religious, became involved in the civil rights campaigns of the 1960s, anti-war protests of the 70s, the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts in the 80s, and even the environmental movements from the mid to late 20th century. In short, it had become an idea that spurred on a number of movements that spanned multiple topics and directions. But most importantly, its primary focus was on making the world a better place. And that focus on making the world a better place was rooted with human beings needing to work toward not only fixing any damage that humans and humanity may have caused, but to also work toward creating a world that is better than the world that was created before it needed fixing by humanity's actions. In a lot of ways, the concept of Tikkun Olam calls on us to push ourselves out of our comfort zones, to change the way we view and see the world, and to then do the hard work to fix that world. This concept seems to walk hand in hand and is intertwined with our very own Unitarian Universalist values. I say this because the concepts behind the modern Tikkun Olam movement outright reflect the principles and values of justice, interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and most importantly, love. Now, given the number of Jewish people that have found their ways into our UU congregations over the decades, and the social justice work that the UU faith did in the mid to late 20th century, work that was done at the same time that this modern vision of Tikkun Olam coming into prominence in Jewish social justice spheres, it does not surprise me that we, as Unitarian Universalists, we find ourselves flirting with the idea of Tikkun Olam in the very work that we do. Because of how diverse we are as Unitarian Universalists, though, I think that where some people might cite some difficulty with the general concept of Tikkun Olam would be that at its heart, the idea is rooted and firmly linked to the divine and divine's creation, and that as stated in the book of Genesis, the divine's creation was good. Some may struggle with the idea that it's rooted to a specific deity, and maybe not to a higher power of your understanding. That's okay. We can still utilize that idea of working to fix a broken world and making it better, and marrying that concept to our own UU principles and values. No need to get the divine involved if that is not your thing, for we have something else to root the basis of our work in, and it's that list of principles that I had listed just a few moments ago. Now, where I think these ideals of fixing a broken world intertwined with our principles and values can begin for a lot of us is with a focus on the communities that we are members of and in. I say this because it is in our communities like this one here where most of us probably draw our strength, our support, and the help that we need in order to make it through difficult and trying times. It is in these communities that we work together to push for the changes in society that we wish to see, how we, as Unitarian Universalists, work to fix a broken world. Author Peter Block of the book Community, the Structure of Belonging, offers us some possible ways for recontextualizing how we view our communities then, to make them places that are better able to take on this task of fixing a broken world. And these tools begin with a recontextualization by him of what authentic community looks like. The first being that we are all living in communities of possibilities, and not of problems. And as communities, we should be focusing on the gifts that each of us brings, because it is these gifts that people bring with them that help get the work done. The second being that community exists for the sake of belonging, and to remember that it takes its identity from these gifts and the generosity and accountability of those within it. Community should never be defined by its fears, its isolation, or its desire for retribution. The third being that we all have the capacity, expertise, programs, leaders, regulations, and wealth required to end unnecessary suffering so that we can create an alternative future. Now, these recontextualizations about what authentic community looks like isn't necessarily going to come easily, especially in this day and age where it seems that divisiveness is the norm and all we can see is problems and a broken world. But Locke's main focus in his book is that change, real change, begins with an authentic community and not with the systems of power and oppression. It is authentic communities that have the power to come together to help one another and to fix a broken world. It's not going to be easy. Just as Tikkun Olam does for those who draw upon it, our own principles and values will call on us to step outside of our comfort zones in order to face the challenges that exist. The systems that are currently in place thrive on the brokenness that exists in the world. It thrives on our silent complicity. Those systems rely on the very brokenness we want to fix for their continued survival. They are the nets that hold down and capture the birds in the forest of the story I shared at the beginning of the sermon. But the birds in the story did not give up. They remembered that they were a community, and then as a community, they were able to come together and to come up with a plan that forced them to step outside their comfort zones and to overcome their fears. They were a community where each one of them brought a different gift that in the end was appreciated and very much needed in uplifting those around them. Without recognizing the gifts and strengths that each of the birds brought with them, and without the realization that everyone was working hard as a community, then they would never have been able to break free of the net that had captured them all. As a world, while we may be a long way off from the idealized paradise that was presented in the world of Star Trek, perhaps as a community, we can work to bring forth the ideals that will bring about such an existence in our local communities. Use those gifts that you have and focus on what you can bring to the table instead of what can be missing. Do not let fear and difference define who you are. To borrow a thought and a phrase that is from a song in most Christian hymnals, others knowing that those singing the song know that they are Christians by their love, let people know who you are by the works that you do as a community. And then with the work that our communities do, perhaps we one day can repair the world and leave it a better place than the one we started. Live long and prosper. Blessed be. Amen. I guess, opening the floor, yeah.
This is just a viewpoint. You mentioned the book of community, the structure of belonging. Was that by Peter Blocker?
Peter Block.
Peter Block. I also want to thank you for being a Star Trek. I work in the library with a lot of young people, and I think a lot of them were never exposed to Star Trek, so I really influenced by Star Wars. So my friend Joe said, I mean, it is possible people can like all Star Wars and not when to talk to them. And they did forget to want to rerun that wonderful one from the second season with Frank Gorshin, Iron Black on the right side.
Yeah. Okay, yes.
That's stuck in my mind for the past 50-something years.
Yeah, so I'm one of those folks that like Star Wars and Star Trek, but I like Star Trek more, let's be honest. I prefer that kind of world to live in as opposed to the world of Star Wars, so. Yeah.
You read from the Old Testament, and I'm Jewish myself.
Okay.
And I noticed in that statement, that's before man was created. Yet later on in the Old Testament, they put man in charge.
That's Genesis, yeah, 2.
Yeah. And as you go, just a point, as you go to the Old Testament, and they begin to use animals as sacrifices. I go every Saturday, I go to the synagogue, and when we read those parts, my son just turns that animals and other people are also important.
Yeah, I mean I think that's where a lot of the environmental movements that are focused with Tikkun Olam. That's why primarily they kind of look at Genesis 1, but they also look at Genesis 2. But then it's like, what's the definition of the word? You know, you've got one translation where it's like, oh, we're in command over all of this, as opposed to some of the other translations where it's like, oh no, we're stewards. And stewardship versus commanding, completely different things for it. And for those that work with Tikkun Olam with regard to the environmental movement, so there's like part of the inspiration for this was actually one of my classes that I took was Global Faiths in the Earth, and to see how do the different faith traditions approach taking care of the earth. And that's how I actually learned about the modern Tikkun Olam movement, was through the lens of taking care of the earth and being responsible stewards as opposed to having dominion over what was created. Yeah. Oh.
But I don't understand is like the Old Testament, and it starts out in the beginning God created the earth. Who wrote that? There's nobody here.
One thing that I will, for anyone that chooses to look at the Bible, especially like for myself, I was raised Catholic, and being a member of the queer community, I've been browbeaten by the Bible numerous times. So, interestingly enough, when I started my time at Drew, which is a Methodist theological school, I kind of held my nose with like, oh God, the Bible. But how they taught it was to look at it, and so the word is called a historiography. So it's the historical story of a people, and people trying to make sense of the world around them. So if you don't necessarily have the belief that this is the word of God, you can always approach it from that historical lens of how are these individuals trying to make sense of what has happened when it comes to being exiled, to returning from exile, when bad things happen. You know, like these were theological debates that were going on, and in the Jewish faith, I know they still go on, because like that's like a big thing is actual like rabbinical discussion about what does this actually mean for us in the world around us. So I did see your hand.
Yeah, so the term authentic communities is really subject to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the problem is that we have so many different groups that consider themselves to be authentic communities, and that they are out there to protect against any harm. And they use religion, Judaism, and Christianity to protect their actions that in fact do cause harm, can cause harm. So the term authentic, I think we have to be careful
Absolutely.
in using that term. I think it's authentic to us, but the problem in the world is you have these conflicting definitions of what is authentic.
And I think that's where Block was trying to focus on that, like where if you're looking at it, you're not. I mean, obviously, yes, you're forming groups, who's in, who's out. That's another lens you can look at the Bible with. But like part of what he's saying is that people are bringing gifts. You're not defining yourself by, okay, you don't look like me, you don't believe what I believe. Like his idea is like that kind of take on community. But if you also marry it with the idea of Tikkun Olam, where the goal is you're trying to make the world a better place, well, I guess, yeah, we can say, what does better place mean? Sure, but, I think ultimately, a lot of it, yeah, it is subjective. You are correct. But we need to start somewhere. That's the thing. And unfortunately, language is messy as a result. But that is a good point. It's something to think about. When you're doing your work, are we doing work that's harming others? And what does that look like? And what are we doing to maybe not cause harm as we do work? Anyone else?
Can I ask another question?
Sure, we just did, so.
Alice, I'll put it in the form of a question. I looked this up last night, because I was familiar with this from dear friends and reading things. But I always sort of Tikkun Olam also as doing smaller things. I mean, it sounds so grand, this idea of repairing the world. Although there's a thing about picking up something from the shore and throwing it back into the ocean.
Oh, the starfish, yeah.
Yeah, the starfish. Is that considered part of Tikkun Olam?
The way I learned about it and the way I interpret it, yes. It doesn't have to be a grand action of, I'm going to go out there and save the world, and fight back the ocean by myself. No, maybe making the world a better place is, I'll use an example from a couple years ago. I was at the Home Depot. There was a woman who was maybe in her 70s, and she had a cart with 3 50-pound bags of rocks. And she's standing there, how am I going to get this into the car? So I was like, would you like some help? And I went and I put it in there. I was like, do you have someone to get this out of your car when you get there, when you get home? Because if not, I can come with you and I can help you with that. She's like, no, my son will take care of that when I get there. Just a small action like that, just to help someone. It made the world, it made her day, it brightened her day, it made it so that she was like, what the heck am I going to do here? And how am I going to do this? And then someone came and helped her. Someone she's probably never going to see again. And that's that concept of paying it forward kind of thing. So, so those little interactions definitely count toward that making the world a better place.
That's also why I think Walgreens sells kitty litter in very portable containers, 7 pounds under.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but some things we never know when we're going to need it, I had a surgery to remove my gallbladder a number of years ago. I was like, okay, you can't lift anything heavier than 5 pounds. I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, there's stuff I got to lift. And that's where I'm grateful I had people who helped me. People who were in my local community, folks from Princeton, where I'm like, well, I can't make anything because I'm supposed to be stuck on bed rest, so they brought food. Those types of things all, to me, fall under that concept of Tikkun Olam. And if you want to say, okay, that's the UU spin on it, then that's the UU spin on it. But that's how I was taught that even those small actions, they all, you take a penny here, penny here, penny here, penny here, eventually you've got a handful of change that adds up to something. Yeah? Okay.
Just wondering if you knew how the concept of Tikkun Olam is thought of in Israel?
Ooh, that I don't know. I'm sure you probably have some individuals who follow it, but just as with, you look at Christianity as a whole, you've got folks who are ultra-liberal, and you've got folks who are ultra-conservative, and it's like, no, dominion over the world versus stewardship of the world. I'm sure there's probably range, but I can't speak to how accurate that statement necessarily is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does fall under that spectrum. It's just we only, we see those negatives and see what's going on in Gaza right now and whatnot. That's what we see because that's what the institutions want us, that's all they're showing us. They're not showing necessarily the dissenting opinions specifically going against those who are in power.
I mean, I feel that they're pretty.
Yeah, well, and I mean, even when you look at, I will state, like for in the United States, I remember when there was a number of protests happening around the U.S. Like from what I saw on the general news, it was barely covered. But when I sat there and I looked at folks that I followed on social media, all these videos and pictures of people at these protests that the main news doesn't cover. So it's what's the narrative? Take care. So what's the narrative that is being fed to us in those instances? So but I would assume it probably does encompass the broad spectrum.
I think what's cool about the small acts is there's an energy. When someone does an act of kindness, there's an energy that's generated between two people. There's also an energy that's generated in anybody that observes the act of kindness one time. It changes the world.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. Thought we might have seen someone else's hand. Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you. I'll be sticking around if you want to chat. I was